Good morning, and welcome to the Research Bureau's 88th annual meeting. We're thrilled to have so many of you join us in our virtual meeting room this morning. Because of your ongoing support, the Research Bureau's expert research, independent analysis, and trusted results are available to help the City of Boston navigate these challenging times. Thank you all. And a special thank you to our 7 premier sponsors of this meeting. We appreciate your generosity and your support.
Comcast strives to make a positive impact across all the communities we serve, and we recognize that our company plays an important role in helping Boston residents stay connected to work, to school, and their families. We are pleased to be a member of the Research Bureau and to support this annual meeting, as together we are making a difference in the City of Boston.
John Hancock has been a proud and dedicated supporter of the Research Bureau and the annual meeting for decades. We consider membership in the Research Bureau the perfect way to invest in Boston's future.
Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts is honored to support the 88th annual meeting of the Research Bureau. This is a critical time for the Boston business community, and we are so pleased to be a strategic partner with the Research Bureau as we all strive to build a better Boston.
I am so pleased to be with all of you today as the presenting sponsor of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau's annual meeting. The way our community has stepped up and used our collective strength to help our city and neighbors over the past few months is incredibly inspiring. We are so grateful for our partnership with the Mayor and the Office of Economic Development, as together we have helped so many small businesses navigate through these challenging times. Supporting them means supporting Boston's economic ecosystem across our city. And now, more than ever, the work of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau is essential to the growth and progress of our city. We applaud the work of the MRB, the Mayor for his leadership, passion, and commitment to our city, and look forward to hearing from him today as we head toward better days.
Hello. At KPMG, we know the importance and value of investing in our people, our clients, and our communities. So KPMG is proud to be a sponsor of the Research Bureau, an organization that has been providing critical solutions to the City of Boston for 88 years. Well done.
Vicinity is proud to be a premier sponsor of the Research Bureau's 2020 annual meeting. Vicinity is the largest provider of district energy solutions in North America. We provide the most reliable, cost-effective, resilient, and environmentally responsible energy available anywhere. Our reliable, low-carbon, green energy supports more than 60 million square feet in Boston and Cambridge. As a premier sponsor and a longtime member of the Research Bureau, Vicinity is pleased to participate in and support the Research Bureau's 2020 annual meeting.
At Gillette, we're proud to support the Research Bureau in this annual meeting. This organization plays such a critical role in shaping this great city we all call home.
This is Pam Coker, President of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, coming to you from a City of Boston rooftop. On behalf of all of us here at the Research Bureau, many thanks to all of our sponsors who supported us today. Thank you to all of you who came together with us today for the Research Bureau's 88th annual meeting. I'm going to head on into the Zoom. I'll see you on there in just a few minutes.
Good morning, everyone. So great to have the chance to visit with you all, even though we are having to do it this morning remotely. The Research Bureau annual meetings are known for Mayor Walsh's policy announcements and the strong sense of community when our broad, dedicated group of engaged civic, institutional, and business leaders come together with city officials. Although this event must be virtual today, it is really so wonderful to feel as if we have all gathered together yet again. Today, we have a very large crowd of over 300 people on our webinar for Zoom. I take this possibility and success, as many of us have successfully transitioned to doing virtual work online together. I take that as a real sign for the Research Bureau. We can do things more quickly than we thought possible when we need to do them. The remote work shows that to many of us that we can adapt and take on new strategies to be effective in changing times. And the reason I take this possibility and success to heart is because I'm continually thinking in the last few months about, and over the past year since I became Research Bureau President, about the Research Bureau's leap into not just the virtual world, but our changing times for education and for how we deliver value and insight, and the importance of taking a look at what else the Research Bureau in particular can and should be doing to successfully deliver value now and going forward to all of you, as there are so many more means to engage, interact, and deliver insights and resources than there certainly were 88 years ago when the Research Bureau got started. We have a great program for you today. We include an introductory video presented by the City of Boston, which you will see next, remarks by Mayor Walsh, and then a Q&A session with the mayor and a panel of senior cabinet officials. So we're thrilled that the mayor brought along a number of his folks, including one that some of us have yet to get an opportunity to meet. So we look forward to visiting with the mayor and his panel after his remarks. Please keep in mind, after the mayor's remarks, we will be taking questions for him and the panel. We will be doing that with a Q&A session. There is a feature usually at the bottom of your Zoom screen where you'll see some other options around video and record or participants, chat. Today we're going to be using the Q&A function. So make sure you look out for that, and you'll be able to submit questions, and we'll look forward to hearing what the mayor and our panelists have to share in response to your questions and comments. So we look forward to seeing you in just a little bit, and now it's the city's show.
Grow and thrive, and we all appreciate the enthusiasm and leadership you have brought to the organization, Pam. Thank you for that. And thanks again to all of you for joining us this morning, and to our premier and table sponsors. Can you speak? Good morning. Can everybody hear me now? Thank you, Pam. Throughout your first year as our president, the Bureau has continued to grow and thrive, and we all appreciate the enthusiasm and leadership you've brought to the organization. And thanks again to all of you for joining this morning, and to our premier and table sponsors for making this a successful event for the Bureau. As the current chair of the Bureau, it's now my honor to welcome and introduce Mayor Martin J. Walsh. Mayor Walsh took office in January 2014 as Boston's 54th mayor. And Mr. Mayor, that must seem like decades ago. We all knew that things would be different for the city with the first change in the mayoral administration in more than 20 years. But I'm sure no one, even the mayor, could have begun to predict the momentous events that are taking place right now, not just in our city, but in our country and across the globe. Mayor Walsh, thank you for your steady leadership, especially in these times. And thanks so much for continuing the tradition of being with the Boston Municipal Research Bureau for our annual meeting. We look forward to your thoughts and your perspective. So now, with a big virtual round of applause, let's turn to the mayor's presentation, beginning with a brief video.
The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases increasing daily.
We are closing all Boston Public Schools to all students. The 124th Boston Marathon is not feasible this year. Tonight, I want to talk to you about what the city has done to be prepared.
We're still here for you. You must be a celebrity.
The lives of our residents and the work of our businesses have been uprooted for weeks.
They're putting themselves in danger, you know, because they know we are positive. They come here every single day with a smile on.
does a great job.
Estamos aquí.
Juntos con el day.
Nula.
We are bringing mobile testing to public housing developments and senior buildings all across the city of Boston. The Boston Resiliency Fund, as of last night, passed the $30 million mark for total money raised.
The money helped me pay rent.
We are into our second round of universal testing on our homeless population.
In the face of challenges like this, I've seen people and organizations stepping up and doing the right thing. I've seen people of all ages showing what it means to be Boston Strong.
When they opened the Boston Hope Hospital at the Convention and Exhibition Center. Well, now the last 2 patients have been discharged.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. I want to thank Marty Jones for that nice introduction and for your incredible work. Pam, thank you as well. This has been an interesting year for you, and to have the first virtual Municipal Research Bureau speech, I want to commend you and congratulate you, and I hope that we're all together again. I want to thank all the participants who have come and joined today in this virtual Zoom speech, which is very important for us. The video that you just watched gives you a sense of the ways that we have come together to meet the challenges of this pandemic and become stronger as a city. And before I get into my final remarks, I want to thank everyone. In that video, you saw lots of people who have been doing incredible work here in the city of Boston, from our first responders to food service folks, to doctors and nurses and medical professionals and hospitals and our sponsors and everyone who has been part of this. It's been an amazing journey, in a lot of ways, an exciting journey to be able to see how we truly can come together as humanity. But it's a long, painful journey as well for a lot of people as well. So again, thank you, everyone, for what you've done during this pandemic and what you're going to continue to do moving forward. To expand on the story of the video, I want to just take you back to a day before COVID. It seems like years ago, but it was only January of this year, the beginning of my 7th year in office, with the State of the City address at Symphony Hall. There was lots of great news to share. Unemployment was at 2%. We had nearly 100 large projects in construction for over $11 billion of investment going on in our city. Tens of thousands of people were finding opportunities in our job training programs. We had a AAA bond rating and talked about it for the 6th consecutive year, the first time in the history of our city it's ever been done. Strong fiscal management allowed us to make record investments in parks and libraries, public safety, social services, affordable housing. We are ranked #1 in America for access to open space, #1 for energy efficiency, and #1 for percent of housing stock that is subsidized. I also made it clear during that speech, that's what our values are. Against all the negativity, we see too much in the national conversation. We reject racism and fight against inequality. Our diversity is our strength, and we can only succeed if we move forward together. I'm sorry, I'm still working the kinks out in this virtual speech, so I apologize. I said the state of our city has never been stronger, but there's still a lot more work to be done. So I set out plans for record investments in our schools to close opportunity and achievement gaps, record investments in affordable housing for seniors, low-income families, and first-time homebuyers, and proposals for major regional commitment to public transit. We also built those plans into our legislative agenda, our policy work, and our budget proposals. Much of this work is still moving forward. I was looking forward then to updating you on the progress at the annual meeting of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. But instead of the speech in March, I ended up giving a different address. It was a live address, primetime television, about a global pandemic. I let the residents know what we were facing as a city, and what we needed to do to get through it. Between January and March, our world changed. Life as we knew it had changed. Our professional sports teams suspended all their seasons. We postponed the Boston Marathon. We closed our schools. We coordinated with the governor on a statewide stay-at-home advisory and an emergency order in closing all essential work businesses. Those were not easy decisions, but they were the right decisions. We're able to set a national tone that this pandemic must be taken very seriously. And we're able to flatten the curve and protect the capacity of our hospital system and our incredible medical professionals to treat everyone who needed care. When I think back on those decisions, what stands out is the realization that this effort would affect every single aspect of our city life, every level of government, every sector of our economy, every corner of our neighborhood, and the daily lives of every single man, woman, and child. We immediately realized the scale of the task in front of us. We faced a highly contagious virus whose impact can be deadly. And to fight it, we had to take steps that went far beyond the health crisis. We had 54,000 children in our Boston Public Schools at home. Another 20,000 kids from charter schools and parochial schools and private schools at home. They needed to be fed. They needed to be taught. Some of them needed housing and healthcare access for their families. We had roughly 100,000 older Bostonians, more vulnerable than others with severe illnesses. They needed to take greater precaution. And then also we need to outreach and support for things like food and medication. We had 40,000 small businesses facing an almost total loss of revenue. We had people experiencing homelessness and others dealing with substance use disorder in shelters and programs that were not set up for social distancing. We had thousands of healthcare workers, first responders, bus drivers, public work employees, cleaning staff, grocery store workers, and all other essential workers who needed to be able to get to work and use personal protective equipment and have the access to testing and quarantine to keep themselves and their families safe. We had 700,000 residents, of which 28% are immigrants, who needed timely and accurate information in many different languages and communication platforms that they use. On top of it all, we had an administration in Washington that didn't seem to understand what the American people were facing. When you put it all together, it seemed overwhelming. So the first task was coordination. We needed a level of complex crisis management to adapt city government and the private sector to resource this situation. We needed to respond in real time, not just a day or a week, but for a period of months. That's why one of the first things that I did as the mayor, I reached out to General Stanley McChrystal and retained the McChrystal Group. General McChrystal is someone who has revolutionized the United States military response to terrorism. As the commander of the Joint Special Operation Task Force, he led the fight against Al-Qaeda across 27 countries. He developed the concept of team of teams, a fast and flexible system to coordinate globally and act decisively on a 24-hour cycle. We had to be able to work together across sectors in a unified response on a daily basis. So we put in place a system that could identify the needs, coordinate responses, track data, and solve problems on a 24-hour cycle. This system has structured our work at my time and this time on a daily basis for the last 3 months. I'm just going to give you a sense of what my day looks like or what our day looks like here in the city of Boston. Every day at 8 a.m., we hold a virtual crisis response forum that includes roughly about 100 people from across city government. The Boston Public Health Commission shares the latest data on the current reality. That includes case numbers and deaths, hospital usage, positive test rates, racial and ethnic disparities, and trends and metrics that we use to inform our decisions. When we get the report on the status of key initiatives over the past 24 hours, we look ahead to the next 24 hours. That includes items like testing expansion, equity interventions, caring for the homeless population, rent relief and small business relief, public safety, PPE supply chains, food distribution, student engagement, city operations, communications and language access, and so many other things. Every single day, we're getting a comprehensive look at where our city stands, what the emerging needs are, and how we can respond to them. In recent weeks, we've been able to transition that conversation into how we support residents, communities, and businesses in a safe and equitable recovery from our economy and society. One of the most impressive aspects of this system is when you see people connect over common problems and collaborate in real-time solutions. Sometimes there are people working together normally, but other times they are forging new cross-department relationships. Sometimes it's a conversation between cabinet chiefs or department heads. Sometimes it's someone who knows the right business or nonprofits to bring into the conversation. Sometimes it's young people who are stepping up to take on new responsibilities. We've had several of our young staff members who have risen to the occasion. I tell them that they're in these roles for a reason. Their career and their lives will never be the same. Often by the end of the day, there's a solution in place or even a whole new approach that we're building. These conversations have led to setting up testing facilities outside community health centers, finding shelter space so people experiencing homelessness could have physical distancing, finding quarantine spaces for our first responders, securing new PPE supply chains for many of our third-party vendors in the city of Boston, and so many more things. It's an effective problem-solving process. It's also weaving new strength into our fabric of our city government. And it's changing the way that we're able to deliver services for our residents and our businesses with new flexibilities and collaboration. When we say this experience makes us stronger, it's not just rhetoric. You can see it happening in real time. And the results, quite honestly, are very impressive. By funding and partnering with our community health centers, we've gotten over 20 testing sites operating all across the city of Boston right now. We've conducted universal testing in the homeless population and secured over 1,000 new shelter beds with the help of college universities, and I want to thank you for that help. We put together a COVID-19 Health Inequities Task Force and provided outreach, testing access, and financial support quickly in response to the disparities in the number of cases that we're seeing. We've distributed over 1.6 million meals at pickup sites and delivery sites in every neighborhood, and we've delivered some of those meals as well, coordinating across multiple departments along with our nonprofit partners. The Boston Public Schools have distributed nearly 32,000 Chromebooks and 2,600 free internet connections. I want to thank all of the companies that helped us with that. Boston Hope Medical Center at the Convention Center was built in 5 days. The city, the state, hospitals, homeless providers, military personnel, public safety agencies, construction industry, labor community, all working together. It served over 700 patients, protected our ICU capacity in our hospitals, and helped limit the spread of COVID in our homeless population. The Boston Resiliency Fund has raised $32 million. We started with a goal of $10 million. We raised that in 72 hours. We've raised over $32 million and distributed over $20 million to local organizations serving vulnerable and underserved communities and residents. We use the funds to create the Boston Immigration COVID Collaborative to unite and support many organizations that serve immigrant communities in our city. In addition to securing a moratorium on evictions, we've gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars to low-income renters who didn't qualify for unemployment benefits or any type of help. And we implemented our plans to lift hundreds of Boston Public School students out of homelessness with permanent rental vouchers for their families with the help of the Boston Housing Authority. We spent over $6 million directly to small businesses through our Rentals Coming, aimed at almost entirely helping businesses with 15 or fewer employees. We've approved close to 500 restaurants for outdoor dining on expanded public and private spaces, which is pretty exciting in the city. 70,000 people are still receiving daily text message alerts in 11 different languages. And about 80,000 seniors receive a phone call each week in multiple languages. On each of these measures, I could thank dozens of organizations and hundreds of people. But if I start thanking people right now, I'll be thanking all day, because that's the kind of effort that this has been. But it's not time to reflect for long on our achievements. 682 people have lost their lives here in the city of Boston, 7,500 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and 120,000 nationwide. Those are all grieving families, and millions more have been through the frightening experience of this illness. Every day, we get up with a renewed determination to prevent another surge and limit further harm. We continue to operate in a critical response mode. We continue to monitor Boston's case data, hospitalization data, and test data on a daily basis. As phase 2 develops, Boston will move forward only when the data tells us it's safe. And we remain in a close daily contact with the state. And we need to stay vigilant right now. We're seeing some other states open up too quickly, and the cases are trending upwards. So I continue to urge caution to everyone in our personal behaviors and in our organizations. Every workplace, public space, and all the activity has a level of risk. The risk needs to be understood and managed, especially by those who are making decisions about the workplace. In all the decisions, we continue to offer cities guidance and support, whether it's in grants to small businesses for PPE or detailed safety guides that you can access through boston.gov/reopening. We do still have a long way to go. This virus is still very much with us, and it will be for a long time. We're still in the middle of this fight. But in our experience so far, we have learned some of the most important lessons about our city. As the need of our residents came to the forefront, we grew in our ability to meet them. The regional homeless problem, housing insecurity, small business challenges, food access, and the effect of poverty on children and seniors. And most of all, the way that historic and systemic racism limit opportunities and limit our resilience as a city. We've seen it in the impact of the COVID-19. We've seen it in every aspect of our life, in our city, and our country. It's one of our country's most shameful legacies. It has denied an entire part of our population the freedoms and opportunities that the rest of us enjoy and benefit from. It has caused untold pain, heartache, and injustice. The murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and in the other victims whose names have been learned brought a lifetime of mistreatment and inequality to the surface. The anger we are hearing is justified. The protests and the conversations we've had are moving us forward. We've been listening, and we have to be acting. I've been listening to Black Americans and people of color in my life, on my team, and particularly here working with me in the city. I've heard colleagues say she's worried about her husband, won't make it home safe at night. I've heard colleagues say that he didn't get an interview for a job unless a white man vouched for him. I've heard students in our high school say they don't see a place for themselves in any of our great colleges here. It is undeniably that racism is clear and a present harm in the lives of our community. Rooting it out is the most urgent priority that we face right now. These are uncomfortable conversations that we have to have, but it's something that we have to have. This is something that I've been focused on since day one, since I took office as mayor of the city of Boston. I'm proud of the progress we've made in many areas, but there's still so much work to be done. This is a moment of urgency and a moment of opportunity in our nation's history. We must seize it. Last week, I shared some of the new steps we're taking. We declared racism as a public health crisis in the city of Boston. We set out strategies in combating it. We moved $12 million from the police overtime budget into work that combats racism and the effects of racism. We've adopted new national standards for the use of force by police. We set up a community process led by former U.S. Attorney Wayne Budd to review all of our policing practices. We will act on these recommendations this year, and we're going to push harder to achieve true equity in our city. There can be no going back to the normal after this crisis ends. We must work together for a new and better normal, one that is inclusive and truly lifts people up. That is also my message to the employer community at this moment. We are certainly in a period of uncertainty, but we're also in a period of opportunity. We can't afford to move slowly and put off systemic change, because we've seen more than ever before what it's costing us. I know that many of you agree with and already have started to act. Just as we have been all in against COVID virus, we must be all in against racism. We must be all in for building a true racial equity in every single organization that does business in our city. Our response to the COVID crisis has given us a better understanding of our ability to respond to profound challenges, to support our small businesses, to feed our community, to care for our homeless and homeless families. The work we do every day is strengthening our belief in the possibility of transformative change. I want to bring it back to the State of the City in January. I said that we are a city that rejects racism, and that while we are stronger than we have ever been, we have a lot to do. Today, I understand those words in a very different way. We have a deep understanding of what it means to be strong. We have a deeper understanding of what it means we must fight against racism. We have a deeper understanding of the work we have to do and the urgency that we have to deal with. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank you for tuning in today. I know that we're going to do something different here today than most of my addresses. I'm going to introduce some of my cabinet, my team, my cabinet. I'm going to have them share a little bit of perspective, and then we're going to have questions and answers at some point. First person I want to introduce is Catherine Burton, my chief of staff. She came to me in the beginning of March, literally came to me the week before the COVID crisis happened. And the way she has stepped up to lead has been unbelievable. She was our representative and is our representative on the Governor's Reopening Advisory Board and a key facilitator of the state and cities coordination. John Barrows, many of you know John, he's our Chief of Economic Development. He certainly understands the challenges facing our small businesses, our immigrant communities, and our entire economy. He's been working here at the city for 6 years. And I want to thank John during this period of what his office and the response his office has done in helping businesses. Marty Martinez, is our Chief of Health and Human Services. To say he has been indispensable to our city in the last 3 months would be an understatement. I am grateful for the work that Marty and his team is doing every single day here in the city of Boston. Emma Handy is our Chief Financial Officer. She and her team have been working hard to manage the city's workforce during COVID-19, while at the same time adapting to the city's budget to address the new realities. I'm going to ask each one of them to say a little word about the work they're focused on and what they see as the most pressing issues moving us forward. And I'd like to now turn the floor over to Chief Marty Martinez.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, everyone here at the Municipal Research Bureau for having us here today. To the Mayor's point, life did change for everyone in March when COVID became the defining reality for our work to keep Bostonians safe and healthy. And from a public health perspective, we started to lay a foundation for this work in January. Boston Public Health Commission, as I'm sure everyone knows, the oldest public health department in the country, started to understand the risks of COVID, what we started to see in other parts of the world, and created some plans for us to respond to what would be a pandemic like we hadn't seen in over 100 years here in the city of Boston. And to the Mayor's point, the work started quickly. We focused on prevention, containment, mitigating risk, and responding to the issues that we've seen on the ground. With over 1,300 cases in the city of Boston and 682 neighbors who lost their lives, the impact's been large. And as we continue to work and focus on it every day, we're not lost that we have to continue to do that work. We monitor key metrics and we look at things like hospitalization, positive test rates, access to testing, beds for isolation and quarantine. We see the leadership that Mayor Walsh and city leaders put into place so that we could handle the impact that we would see here in the city of Boston. And we've been ready to tackle the tough choices and decisions that had to be made while putting public health and data first. As the Mayor has said repeatedly, we cannot have an economic recovery without a public health one, where the health and well-being of Bostonians are front and center in all of our decision-making. That's how we've led to this point. That's how we will continue to make decisions, and I'm proud of that here in the city of Boston. While we respond to the health crisis, we've had to make some tough choices that I know everyone knows to mitigate the risk, reduce crowds, close non-essential businesses, limit gatherings, wear facial coverings, and I'm sure most folks had never heard of the phrase social distancing before March, but it's become center to what we needed to do and what we continue to need to do. But all of these measures have made a difference. They've not only helped limit the spread of this virus, but they have saved lives, there's no question. And we have more work to do to make sure that we keep central the risks that are associated with COVID. And we've done this work through a lens that's been important. Through this all, we've kept an equity lens and have looked at the disproportionate impact that COVID has had, not only on specific populations around age and disproportionately around different communities, but we've had to make sure that we keep that focus along the way. While we know who's most physically impacted from COVID, those over 65 and those with underlying health conditions, we also know there's inequities in our health already in the city of Boston. This played out in the data that unfortunately was not surprising to see. That's the reason that we see that Blacks and African Americans account for over 38% of all cases of COVID here in the city, although they only comprise of 25% of the city's population. Latinos account for 27%, although they're only 19% of the population. And they still are the highest testing subgroup in the city at over 36% of all Latinos getting tested are testing positive for COVID. Higher than any race or ethnicity, we've seen this disproportionate impact across the communities of color. We also know who's been working through all of this and who our essential workers are, whether it's in healthcare as health aides, or whether it's nurses and doctors, whether it's those folks who are working in hotels and stores and other places. Those essential workers have continued to be exposed. The mayor saw this early on and created, as he mentioned, the COVID-19 Health and Equities Task Force to ensure that we did not lose focus on this work and that we made sure we understood what we needed to do to counter it. We've continued to look at this data every single day to understand what we're seeing and what strategies we need to put in place. And we're still doing it because we're not out of it yet. COVID is still in front of us, and we can't forget that. That is clear, and as the mayor has said, we want to recover from COVID more equitably than we entered it, and that will take a lot of work. We have to continue to do this work and continue to make sure that it's central to what we want to focus on. As we see cities and places across the country decide that COVID might be in the rearview mirror, it isn't here in the city of Boston. We have to be focused on it, and we have to be ready to make tough decisions so we can have long-term recovery, not starts and stops, which will be much more difficult to sustain. Before I pass this on to Chief Barros, I want to say that a little bit to what the mayor spoke of. The death of George Floyd, the protests demanding change and true effort to dismantle systemic racism has further reinforced that we need equity to be at the heart of our work. Not just one-off or something we think about at times, but it must be a true lens for not only how we do business in the city of Boston, but how we govern as a city. As a man of color who's helping to lead this administration's response to this work, it is a lens that we hold true for our efforts to really move the needle here in Boston. Mayor Walsh has led by example on this front, and I'm proud that we're rolling up our sleeves and focusing on what we need to do to make sure this moment does not pass us by without making real progress and systemic change to battle what's in front of us. That is what this has been about for us. That's how we've tackled COVID. That's how we've tackled many of the issues we face here in the city of Boston. And as a leader of color in this administration, I want us to continue to be able to do that. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share a little bit with you. And now I'd like to pass it on to Chief Barros, our Chief of Economic Development.
Thank you, Chief Martinez. Thank you for your work and your leadership at this time. I want to also thank Marty Jones and Pam for your work and all of the members and those who are with the Bureau today for your annual meeting. In the very beginning of this pandemic, the mayor asked us to call members of the business community to get information, data, and begin to understand how it was impacting business very early on. So I want to thank all of those who shared information and data, who allowed us to peek into your reality. And we quickly understood that some of the industries were getting hit early and getting hit hard. In the hotel and accommodation space, occupancy was down way before government even thought about orders to shut down businesses. And so we were quickly understanding from those that were getting hit what kind of role government needed to play. The banking industry and the banking leaders quickly shared with us some of the information that you were seeing from businesses. And with that information, the mayor quickly understood that we needed to do something for our smallest businesses, the businesses that were the most vulnerable, and frankly, the businesses that we all anticipated weren't going to be ready to take advantage of some of the federal aid and other financial assistance that was coming down the pipeline. And so the mayor quickly established, as he talked about, a small business fund. And through that small business fund, we were able to support some of the smallest and most vulnerable businesses of our city. And in fact, the most diverse part of our economy, where 48% of the businesses we helped to support were immigrant or nationalized citizen owned. 70% of those businesses, over 70% of the businesses we support, in fact, were micro businesses with 5 or less employees. Many of them through our neighborhoods, making our neighborhoods special. We also heard from businesses that there were certain employees that weren't covered. In certain industries, we heard from businesses that many of their employees were undocumented. And so we quickly pivoted, and the mayor raised money through the Resiliency Fund to help provide some assistance to undocumented residents and employees of your industries. So as we pivot to try to open our economy, we use the same kind of strategic lens, the lens that helps us to understand government's role. And so the city of Boston is trying to make sure that Boston's businesses and nonprofit organizations recover in a way that restores our strengths, addresses our weaknesses, and adjusts to our new reality. And then we want to make sure that we do this all by leading with equity. We're guided by equity because diversity is our strength. We stay very close to Chief Martinez and his team because sustaining the progress in public health is essential for a sustained rebound of the economy. Nobody wants to see us reclose again. But it is about, in fact, protecting our livelihoods, making sure that our businesses, big and small, can recover in a way that continues to make them viable businesses because we need them in our city. And then third, we need to make sure that Boston retains its competitiveness. Boston is more than just a city of a collection of businesses or jobs. We are a place with amazing things to offer, with over 500 arts and cultural public events every year, 16 major museums, over 1,500 nonprofit arts and cultural organizations, over 4,500 food service and retail establishments. We're a place that is about culture and innovation. Last year alone, we invested $262 million in Boston-based food and restaurant startups. We're also a place that is anchored by our tourism, hospitality, and food service industry. We have over 5,000 hotel rooms in development, 38 miles of harbor walkway, and then we receive 22 million annual visitors, tourists, and conventionaires to Boston every year. And so this is something that we've got to pay attention to as we open. Boston is anchored by 5 amazing pillars: healthcare, high tech, finance and industry, accommodations and food services, and the EDS, our educational services. So as a city, we quickly understood that it was important for us to listen to you, so we continue to convene roundtables on food and restaurants, tourism, sports, and entertainment, on small businesses and large businesses, on businesses in transportation, open space, and recreation, on those in our real estate sectors, property management, arts and culture, places of worship, and those who are helping people with childcare, and of course our universities and colleges, to make sure that we understand what your needs are, and to also provide local guidance to help interpret and clarify some of the guidance and requirements that we're hearing from the state. And then finally, we're also trying to make sure that we support our most vulnerable businesses through the recovery. So the mayor stood up the Reopen Boston Fund to help small businesses procure personal protection equipment, and to make sure that they had the kind of guidance that they needed to understand the kind of modifications they needed with their businesses. And then we continue to advocate on behalf of businesses on license changes, such as the ones that allowed for liquor sales, for takeout and delivery, mortgage forbearance, and utility relief. The mayor continues to hear from you about, and that informs his advocacy at the federal level as well, as we pushed for museums to be funded through the CARES Act, knowing that they were such an important part of our economy. And as we push for the kind of flexibilities that we now see in PPP. That kind of work is essential. And it's also essential, as Chief Martinez says, that we continue to make sure that all of Boston recovers. And so we continue to keep our focus on the systemic issues, such as racism, that have created some weaknesses in our communities and in our economy. So focusing on the communities hardest hit is critical. Working with those neighborhoods to make sure that those restaurants have the same chances to have outdoor seating as restaurants in some of our hottest restaurant locations in the city. Making sure that those businesses, the businesses that are owned by women, people of color, and in our hardest hit neighborhoods have the same kind of technical assistance and guidance that they need to figure out this new economy, to figure out how they stay safe, keep their employees and customers safe. So we continue to look forward to working with you on all of these objectives to make sure that Boston rebounds in a way that is building a more just and equitable economy. I want to say thank you again for all of your partnership in helping that. Now I want to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Chief Emma Handy.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to speak briefly about the role of administration and finance in the mayor's response to COVID-19 and the work that we've been doing over the past several months. We spoke to the Research Bureau, Justin Sterrett, the city's budget director, and I think last month to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 on the mayor's first budget submission. And so there's certainly quite a bit to say about how the COVID-19 epidemic has impacted the city's finances, but I actually thought I would start with how we have been managing the city's workforce through this, since that is kind of the other side of the responsibility of the administration and finance cabinet, managing our workforce, supporting our departments, and supporting our employees throughout the course of our response. I would say that we have been focused over the past several months under the mayor's leadership on both continuity and adaptation in terms of our workforce. The city of Boston is a large employer. We employ over 18,000 employees across the city. And it was obviously a very interesting exercise for us to need to undertake to understand how COVID-19 would impact our workforce, because in many cases, we were obviously trying to follow public health guidance consistent with the things that Chief Martinez talked about in terms of sending your employees to work from home and helping them to make choices that were supportive of public health guidelines by ensuring that we had provided adequate leave policies, adopting the new federal leave benefits, and the mayor also adopted a new leave benefit for emergency responders. But we also needed to determine which of our employees were absolutely critical to respond to COVID-19 on the ground, both in a proactive response and also to ensure that we were maintaining that piece of continuity that was essential. So we wanted to make sure that we could continue to pay our employees. Therefore, our payroll department was considered essential. We wanted to make sure that we were continuing to collect city revenues so that we were able to, on the other side, support the expenditures that were necessary for supporting our COVID-19 response. And so all of that work required that we do some very quick analysis of which employees were essential in an emergency and needed to continue to be in the building and not working remotely, similar to, I'm sure, work that you all have done over the last several months to adapt your workforce very quickly. It probably will not surprise anyone that the city of Boston had no modern work from home policies before all of this began, and so we needed to stand up work from home policies. We needed to deploy technology. I don't think anybody used a laptop in the city of Boston before COVID-19, and so we needed to do a very quick turnaround about who needed those resources and how do we get those into our employees' hands so that we could ensure that we were both maximizing the public health benefit of keeping people home when we could, while also ensuring that these critical services, particularly these backbone administration and finance services, continued throughout the course of the pandemic response. And of course, the adaptation of the workforce became critical and continues today. So you may have heard in recent days that the mayor reopened playgrounds. We are reopening pickup collections at the Boston Public Library starting next week. And so we continue to look at each of the services that the city of Boston provides and determine how we can open them safely in response to the guidelines issued from the state and also in consultation with the Boston Public Health Commission. And that work is really being done service by service, and each one of them has a workforce component to it. And so our office has been working closely with our departments to understand what exactly their plans are for ensuring employee safety and for making sure that we have the adequate PPE that we need, that the cleaning protocols are in place, and that we are working collaboratively with our unions to ensure that our workforce is well educated and feel secure as they return to the workforce. On the other side of the coin, on the finance side, we have been working to manage our own resources that have changed quite a bit in response to COVID-19. We talked in our member briefing last month about the adjustments that were made in the mayor's initial budget over the course really of a week, because the timing of the mayor's budget release was right around the time when COVID-19 became a very real reality, and we started to understand what those impacts would be for the city of Boston. And so over the course of about a week and a half, we cut something like $30 million from the mayor's budget, and had to make some adjustments, obviously, on the spending side to ensure that could be sustained responsibly. And since that time, I think we've learned more about what the tail of COVID-19 looks like. Certainly in March, I think the expectation was that we may be rebounding quicker than has actually been the reality. And as we've learned more and more about the disease of COVID-19. And so the mayor's resubmitted budget, which was resubmitted yesterday, makes additional reductions for a total reduction of $65 million to the FY21 budget, and corresponding service reductions from those important investments that we had initially planned. We are fortunate that we have been able to maintain investments in education and housing and public health through the mayor's budget. In part of the reallocation of police overtime that the mayor talked about, we are supporting the work of the public health emergency that both the mayor and Chief Martinez talked about. And so I think, fortunately, the calendar of the budget timeline has allowed us to be reactive to both the needs of COVID-19, but also the needs of the current moment, and make sure that we are putting the resources where we need them to enable the data collection and the collaboration across city government to respond to these issues of racism and really rise to the moment and ensure that our budget is a reflection of those values. So moving forward from here, our most pressing work that needs to be done is to continue to do the evaluations of our workforce that I'm sure you all are also completing, which is looking at who can come back, who needs to come back, and how do we continue to manage in a world where a great deal of our workforce will be remote for some period of time, so that we can, again, ensure that we are living by those public health guidelines. And also, how do we plan on the resource side to reflect this new reality? I think in the early days of our COVID-19 response, everything was new, and every day our reality changed. And while some of that has become a little bit more understood at this point, as we think ahead to what the fall may hold, what the school year may hold, a lot of the resource questions are still to be answered. And so it is the responsibility of the Administration and Finance Cabinet to be planning our resources wisely, so that we are in a position to be able to respond and support the mayor's priorities as we move forward in just meeting the moment and rising to the occasion. So with that, I will introduce the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Catherine Burton.
Thank you so much. And I want to just acknowledge not only the mayor's leadership, but also the cabinet, who has been integral in taking this time to facilitate incredibly difficult decisions. The mayor has led the charge, but the cabinet has surrounded him, and we have been able to make tremendous progress. So I'll speak just very briefly. The mayor touched on so many things, but I want to emphasize, at the beginning of this crisis, when I started, the mayor understood the magnitude of COVID-19 on the city. And so we needed to and did take extremely quick action to figure out how to effectively shut down the city, which has been a common theme through this. Now, keep in mind, the mayor and I had no working relationship prior, so I needed to solidify myself not only as a trusted advisor to the mayor, but also to an entire organization that I never had a formal opportunity to introduce myself to, and still haven't. And so that's a process that we're going to be undergoing over these next few weeks as we move into the reopening and recovery phase. So the mayor touched on this, but we had to cancel or postpone much of what made Boston and what makes Boston, Boston, whether that be the St. Patrick's Day Parade, the Boston Marathon, which is a huge economic driver, BPS for our students, libraries, the list goes on. So this has been the most fascinating onboarding experience I've ever had. I've yet to watch the orientation video. I'm excited and thrilled to get to that at some point. But I'll touch a little bit upon my role on the governor's the Reopening Advisory Board. So the governor convened 17 members from across the state to listen and participate in hearing from over 25 industry association and stakeholders, which represented thousands of member businesses, organizations, and residents. And in addition, we got 3,400 submissions from people who didn't necessarily sit and present to the advisory board. The importance of why we had a seat at that table was because we are the capital city and we have very unique needs within the city, meaning that we have 700,000 people and residents within Boston, but on a single day, that doubles. So we had to make decisions that didn't necessarily align with the state, but worked hand in hand with them to have them understand why we couldn't just start bringing in people as they reopened office spaces, for example, that we needed a little extra time to help the office industry and the businesses and property owners and managers to give them time to plan with the guidance provided by the state, and then with additional guidance that we offered as a city. So it was moments like that where we had to work hand in hand and carve out space within the state guidelines with the recognition that we do play an integral role, and again, the unique placement that we have within the state, within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So with that, I'm going to keep it very short because I know there are a ton of questions, but I just wanted to talk about my role within as we reopened, and then happy to delve into anything that you guys have. And I know this, again, the cabinet, the Bureau, everything you guys do. Thank you, Marty, Pam. I know that everyone is trying to find a new norm. We don't know what that looks like. We'll figure it out. And I can attest that with the mayor's leadership, we will get there and we will come out stronger, more resilient, and most importantly, stronger. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much to John and Marty and Emma, and especially Catherine. It's a pleasure to have you engage with the Research Bureau for the first time. We're glad you're on board, and as you say, an incredible onboarding experience. But we're glad to have your strategy and your partnership on this team, taking care of the city of Boston and serving the city on the governor's reopening board. We do have some questions for our panelists and for the mayor. And now is also the time for anyone who would like to toss in a question. You can go to that Q&A box and make a contribution there, and we will share your question with the appropriate panelist or with the mayor. But I think first we'd like to start with a question for the mayor. Mayor, as many of your peers in Boston's peer cities are facing these same challenges of the public health crisis, the economic crisis, and calls to address systemic racism nationally. Can you talk a little bit about how Boston's response compares to its peer cities? And particularly curious is their sharing of ideas among mayors across the country as ways to navigate these challenges are tried in one place or another. And are there ways that Boston is serving as a model or a resource for other cities? For example, Boston standing up its resiliency fund.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you for the question, and thank you whoever asked the question. Throughout this whole pandemic, I spent a lot of time talking to mayors across Massachusetts, sharing best practices, supporting each other, working with each other. I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily pick who's working better than others. I think a lot of it is just working collectively together and trying to keep our residents safe. I've also spent a lot of time talking to national mayors. One of the first mayors that reached out to me in the very beginning of this was Mayor Durkin from Seattle. And what she said to me was, you know, prepare, be quick, make decisive decisions, move forward. This is real and this is serious. And in working with mayors from around the country, we were also looking at, we were at different levels of COVID during the different kind of periods of COVID. and having that network is extremely helpful. The resiliency fund is something that most places didn't have. I'm not sure any other city that had something of that magnitude, and LA had something similar, but it wasn't to the same magnitude. And a lot of them commented on Boston and being such a special place because the business community is so connected to government in a lot of different ways, and they were complimentary of us in the resiliency fund, those mayors, and I think that that's been helpful to us. 3 weeks ago, the COVID world changed for us. We were dealing with racism, and we were dealing with unrest and protests, and again, spending many hours on the phone with mayors from Massachusetts that were going through protests and how to handle it. A lot of them did look to Boston to see how we handle a situation like that. They're not used to seeing large-scale protests in their community, so we're offering assistance in any way we can. But I'm on a chain, a conversation chain with mayors from around the country, and every mayor that you see, or every city that's on TV, whether it's Washington, D.C., or Seattle, or Atlanta, or L.A., or New York, or Chicago, Portland, Oregon, and you can name the city, it's on there. We were actually offering support to each other in real time. And this past weekend, we were offering support to Mayor Bottoms in Atlanta and tell her that we're thinking of her and praying for her. So the network of mayors helping each other really has been amazing as far as thinking and sharing best practices. So that's what I've been doing, and spending a lot of time and talking to people and taking advice, quite honestly.
Mm-hmm. Sure, thanks very much. And I know there was much work in partnership with many of the organizations that are here with us today, including folks that are supporting the homeless population, and folks that are participating with food banks, folks that have been partners with Boston Public Schools over the years. And so I know partnerships are to be found both across cities and across the country, as well as locally.
Yeah, Pam, let me just add one other thing, and I should have remiss not to add in the beginning. One thing that we set up right at the beginning of this was a daily phone call with our city council, the Boston City Council, and we had a daily call updating the council on every aspect of what we're doing in the city, and sharing best practices and advice back and forth. And for the first, I'd say 6 weeks, we spoke daily, Monday, 7 days a week. And for the last 6 weeks, we've been talking Monday through Friday, and informing the council on everything that the administration's been doing and working back and forth. And it was a great partnership. We have suspended those calls right now due to the fact that the COVID is still here, but we just didn't have a lot to talk about in the course of a day as far as due to COVID. And so that's been important as well. I think it's been a building relationship there with the council. And I think the president of the council, Kim Janey, I think she's on the call today. And I want to thank her as well for her partnership as we move forward here.
We have a couple of more questions for you. One is, has the mayor's office considered shutting down select streets within the city, for example, Newbury Street, to allow shops or restaurants to use sidewalk or road space for outdoor operations?
Yeah, everything's on the table. We're open to everything. I think that, we also have to balance the community and the neighborhood and every part of our city, except maybe actually not even downtown. There's a neighborhood everywhere. So we're open to the ideas. We did something similar on Hanover Street. We still have access on Hanover Street, but we've shut parts of the street down, sides of the street down. But anything that we can think of that's going to enhance and help our business community and help our community, we're open to the idea.
Terrific, thank you. And that was a question from Paul Monby. We have a question from Tom Samalaka as well. Always heartwarming, always engaged, very supportive Tom. He says, Mayor Walsh, our thanks to you and your team for leading the way through COVID-19. My question is, he says, how are you doing? How is your team doing? And have you been able to decompress at all?
I'll let my team answer that question. I'm blessed. There's really been, believe it or not, after 7 years of being the mayor, there's really been, in some cases, a bonding ability here. We're in this together and working off each other. And I think that in some ways, COVID has strengthened our team as far as relationships and connections. And I think that that's good. I'll be quite honest with Tom. The last 3 weeks have been extremely difficult because it's emotional. And I've spent a lot of time personally talking to employees, Black employees in particular, who work with me every day in City Hall. And I think we've all run the gamut of emotion. And it's been difficult because sometimes you think that it's out of our control because we want an immediate fix. In a situation like COVID, when we had a problem where there was accessing food, we're able to turn around a process in 24 hours, setting up a rental relief fund in 24 hours, setting up a small business relief fund in 24 hours, setting up the resiliency fund in 24 hours. All of that can be fixed. But when you talk about racism and systemic racism, it's not something that I can just sign something into law or we can just pass something. It really is a whole different process. And I think that for me personally, as mayor of Boston, as a natural person, wanted to fix everything, understanding that this is a long process. So it's important for me to be a good listener and also working collectively with not just city employees and other elected officials, but with the entire Boston community. We have an opportunity to do a lot. So, and I'm grateful for the team around me. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on how you're feeling, but that's how I feel.
Thank you, Mayor. A bit of a follow-up on that, as we talk about this being a long process, what does equity in recovery look like compared to equity work before the crisis? And we're in this next stage of a long process, and how does equity fit into that process? How can we support the city and work with the city in achieving its goals for equity and inclusion?
Well, if you go back to my first year as mayor, I talked about equity inclusion. It was one of the cornerstones that I spoke about. And our policies have been geared towards equitable policies. What COVID has done for us is allowed us to take a deeper look at what true equity really does mean. And after the last 3 weeks and the protests and what people are talking about, the sense of urgency is even greater. And I think the difference is that it seems like we have a lot more partners in this work today than we might have had before. And I think that that's something that has been helpful in a lot of different ways. I'm going to ask somebody, I don't know if, I know John or Marty or even Emma, or Catherine, actually, anybody, if they want to jump in on this, add a little bit of insight maybe.
Thank you, Mayor. We've been looking at how we use equity as a lens to strengthen our economy moving forward. Clearly, as the mayor said, COVID unearthed some real weaknesses. So there are 4 strategies that we are focused on. One is improving access to capital for small businesses, for businesses owned by people of color. Some of that is about technical assistance. Some of that is making sure that we have our conversation with, folks in our capital markets, banks and such, to understand sort of what we need to do to help make those connections. The second one is access to opportunity and wealth building. It's critical. The wealth gap, the racial wealth gap is something that we're focused on and needs to be bridged. The third is making sure that we have training and technology available as we move into the post-COVID economy. Technology is going to be also important to businesses and workers alike. And then third, access to thriving, healthy neighborhoods. Well, fourth, access to thriving, healthy neighborhoods and local economies in those neighborhoods is going to be a key strategy in making sure that we're able to fight some of the systemic issues that we have in our economy and in our society as we deal with it moving forward.
Great, thank you. I think we have a couple more follow-up questions. One for me, for Catherine, and of course for the mayor as well. Catherine, your engagement on the Governor's Reopening Board is terrific. We're so glad to hear that Boston and its unique needs are being recognized at the governor's level, and he's engaged in conversations about the city. One of the questions we have, though, is the city likely to take a slightly slower or more cautious approach than what the state might be doing as it figures out its path? One of the things that comes to mind around this is the city's focus on shutting down construction, given we're such a concentration of construction activity and the concerns about health and safety of workers on those construction initiatives, whereas the governor did not do the same. So there are other ways that the city might approach things a bit differently just because of who we are in our city dynamics in terms of population.
Mayor, I'll let you do the construction and then I can follow, but you can explain why we made the construction call.
Yeah, I think that most times we're aligning directly with the state as far as closing and reopening. There are times where we might take a different approach because of the size of Boston and the amount of people that come into the city on a daily basis. I think that's something that we have to be cognizant of. When the office reopening, we delayed ours for a week, and a lot of the big businesses in Boston chose not to open up until after the summer. And I appreciate that work because we're still in the midst of COVID, so I want to thank them for that. When it came to construction, I wouldn't necessarily say I just disagree with the governor. I wouldn't say I disagree with the governor, but I think a lot of places in the country, construction was not shut down. And I didn't understand the rationale behind that. We have tens of thousands of construction workers in the city of Boston that are potentially at risk of COVID-19, just like anyone else in the city who was sent home. And I felt that it was important to address that issue and stop the spread. I think the governor, I know the state followed through in a lot of different ways. Some of the jobs were able to stay open. I didn't think at the time we had the ability or capacity to put safety precautions in place to protect construction workers. And what's happened since then, we have a thriving construction industry right now. Most jobs are up to 100% capacity. To my knowledge, we have only had a couple incidents of potential COVID-19 on construction sites. So it really gave us a roadmap on how to reopen and open up on the industries by putting in real safety precautions. So that's kind of, I'll turn over to Catherine now.
Yeah, so just to give everyone a sense of where we are, so the state laid out a 4-phase plan, and we are entering soon the 2.5 of 4. I didn't think we were going to go into half measures, but we are, and I think that was a good decision. And just like the state, the city is using the public health metrics to ensure that at every phase, and the sense was to have a minimum of 3 weeks between each phase, was to ensure that we didn't get too far out, and that the health and well-being of the residents were always number one. There is a concern, and I think Marty would emphasize that we are not out of this, and we are watching as we reopen with each phase. We are monitoring incredibly closely to see if there are additional spikes or an increase in our positive tests. So we gave the example. I gave the example of the office buildings. And as we move forward, again, it's a very back and forth conversation. So now as we even talk about going from 25% to potentially 50% capacity within office buildings, that's an internal conversation that we're having. The state reached out, and that's an internal conversation that we're now having just to gauge with Marty's guidance how we manage that. Do we feel comfortable with that? What is the date we feel comfortable doing that? So again, it's been a good partnership. They've been responsive and again cognizant that we're unique, and so it's a careful balance, and I'm just grateful for the leadership again that we are using healthcare. We're using the metrics that we monitor every single day to ensure that we are making the right decisions again for the residents of Boston. So that's where we stand, and the mayor is never afraid. If it doesn't look right or feel right, he'll make the change and push back, and that's again what's right for Boston. So we'll always lead with that.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of financial questions and then a few more before we wrap up as well. So we have a question from Marty Jones. asking about what sources of revenue the city financial officials are most worried about, looking at the fiscal year 21 budget. One that the Research Bureau has in mind as we're evaluating the city budget is the challenge of getting a handle on what state aid for Boston might look like, given the state is really struggling to get its own budget process underway. And so that's a question for Emma or the mayor, as you see fit.
Just waiting to see if the mayor wants to answer. All right. So I agree with you, Pam. I think certainly we have seen and have forecasted declining revenue in significant numbers around excise taxes and some departmental revenue and things like that. And so that is where, when we make adjustments to our budget in the resubmission that was resubmitted yesterday, most of the change occurs. Those are concerning, but we are able to forecast them, and we are using information based on hotel utilization and restaurant revenue, anticipated tax receipts. And so there's some, I think, educated guesses behind our work to forecast those, and we feel good about those forecasts. We don't feel good about having to revise revenue downward, obviously, but we feel good about our ability to forecast where those might be headed. I completely agree that the largest place of concern at this point is state aid. We just don't know what the state will need to do in order to balance their budget. And we don't have, I think, a good sense of how we should plan as a municipality moving into FY21. And so that creates a great deal of uncertainty for us. When we submitted the mayor's revised budget yesterday, we did downgrade our local aid total by about $10 million. And that felt like a responsible estimate about where to start the conversation and make sure that we are accounting for changing times. But I don't think we know what that final number looks like. And I'm sure that members on this call have seen the headlines from other communities around the state laying off teachers and other municipal workers because cities and towns are anticipating that revenue will decline and will not be able to keep up with certainly the governor's initial numbers in January. That is from another time and another reality. But I think there's a great deal of uncertainty and fear that we could be looking at numbers like the Great Recession, and those are very challenging for cities and towns to absorb.
And just to add a little bit to that, as Emma talked about the Great Recession, and I believe she was an A&F at the time at the state, this is unlike that time, because this revenue dried up or evaporated in 3 months. And I think that, the legislature, I served there from 97 to 2013, and we were preparing for that inevitability. And this one, we're still not there yet. We're still not up. So it's going to be quite some time, I think, before the state can figure out what the budget is and get a good handle, so they're not 9C cutting a little later down the road. So I think we are in this for the long haul. So Emma, I mean, what Emma's concerns are, they're my concerns.
Great, thank you. Just a few more questions and then we will wrap it up by 1 p.m. as planned. We have a question from Mark Beatty, who really appreciates you and your staff attending today. The question is, with the increase in protests and crime in the city, is defunding police overtime hurting police morale and sending the wrong message? Or is it meeting these new additional needs of the city?
Thank you. I wouldn't say we have increase in crime in the neighborhood. I think that if you look at the numbers, they're pretty similar to last year. And last year we had a 20-year low. Defunding police, we're not defunding the police department in Boston. What we're doing is redirecting some of the money from overtime to programs that will help us with some of our systemic problems that we're dealing with around racism and other issues. I think that that's really important. The one thing I will say is that Boston, and after when I became the mayor in 2015, President Obama put together a task force to talk about policing after Ferguson, what happened in Ferguson. And one of the 5 cities that the president at the time referenced of a model of community policing was Boston. And we have a good story to tell here in Boston. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't take a look at our rules and procedures and policies and practices. It doesn't mean that. I think we should constantly be doing that and continually be building trust in our community. And the incident, Mr. Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, it should not reflect on Boston. It is reflecting on Boston and all police forces across the country. But now is the time, and I'm not saying Mark did this, but rather, it's not a time to get defensive. It's a time to be proactive. And I think that that's what we're going to do moving forward.
Perfect.
Protests are adding, by the way, to the budget. When back about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we canceled all parades and festivals in Boston from moving through after Labor Day. And so I was thinking as we did that and talking to Emma and some other folks that we're going to be able to save some revenue here and have some money. But the protests have taken away any savings we have, because instead of having parades now, we have marches and protests. But again, there's a reason behind those marches and protests that we have to keep at the forefront of our brain.
Yeah, I've got one more public safety related question. Rebecca Lee is interested in understanding the challenges of getting 100% participation of the BPD in wearing body cameras.
Thank you for that. 3 years ago, the conversation was BPD didn't have body cameras, and we have them now. And now the conversation is 100%. When you say 100%, I'm not sure if we're ever going to get to 100%. I don't think any department in the country has 100% body cameras. What we do have, though, is we have over 1,000 officers in the police department right now that either have the body cameras on them or the equipment's coming. So all of our outward-facing police officers will have it, and some specialty units have it as well.
Well, we've got about 3 minutes left before I know you need to go. So I have 2 questions for you left. One is, and these are both fun things. We'll move to some slightly lighter things. One is, what strategies is the city working on to make sure children and young people have a fun and productive summer?
That's a complicated question. We're doing everything we can. It's hard to answer that right now because we're still trying to figure out rules and regulations around having camps and things like that. We are looking at having sporadic camps and pools and things like that. So I'm going to put that right back on parents. You might have to be creative, and I know you've had a long time, but you might need to be creative. And I just want to go back to the other question just real quickly.
Sure.
Body cameras is not the answer solely to policing and the problems. It's about relationships. It's about trust. A camera doesn't build trust. A piece of equipment doesn't build trust. What builds trust is having communication and comments. And I just want to throw that out there on the conversation because as Wayne Budd's committee starts to look at our rules and procedures and policies, I'm expecting they're going to make some recommendations on what we can do to strengthen our relationships in policing. But also it's built on the foundation of our community policing. When Commissioner Gross became the commissioner, he created a Bureau of Community Engagement, specifically dealing with community policing. And as that office opens, there's more and more work that has to happen there.
Great, thank you. And one other question for you, and you can take it now or respond later. The question is from Matt Kiefer. Thank you for your leadership, but besides contributing to the Resiliency Fund, are there other things the business community can be doing at this stage to help the city move forward?
Absolutely. I think that just a quick answer is anyone who's interested in financially, John talked about creating access to capital for businesses of color. He wasn't just talking about city funded sponsored programs. He's thinking about other opportunities, number one. And number two, I would just ask everyone, and I did this at the chamber speech, I think my second or third year as mayor, is look at your own departments, look at your own offices, have conversations with your employees, your Black employees, ask them how they're feeling, ask them some ideas that they might think about that could help enhance a better work environment. Also think about when you're thinking about your boards and thinking about giving people opportunities for promotions, rather than saying people aren't qualified, how about we start thinking about how do we get folks qualified while they're working in our different operations, so that when the time comes, they are prepared for promotions. I think all of those different things are helpful, but most importantly, have conversations. If you're listening today and you're not quite sure, and you watch the protests and you see them turn violent, and you're focusing on the violence that happened there, or you're watching TV and it seems like some of the news channels all just focus on the violence. It's not about the violence, it's about the message. It's about the message. And I would ask people just to think about the message, and if you're not quite sure what that message is, have conversations with people, because for all of us, the message, I think, is getting clearer and clearer every day.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I mean, this has been a wonderful opportunity for the Research Bureau and other community members that gathered with us here today to visit with you and have the opportunity to also engage with Catherine and Emma and Marty and John. We really appreciate you all taking this extensive amount of time to share what's going on for you and how things are getting done and how we can participate. Also, thanks to all of our over 300 attendees for joining in this conversation and engaging with the Research Bureau. We really look forward to seeing you again soon, virtually, probably for some time still, but hopefully in person before this difficult year is out. As the mayor always reminds us, be safe and stay focused on what we need to do. We look forward to achieving a return to better health as we work together. Thank you so much.
Enjoy your coffee and dessert.
Take care, everyone.